What occurs when one of Hollywood's largest action stars takes a seat for what should be a run-of-the-mill interview and finds himself in one of the most stunned moments in daytime television history? Today, we're taking you inside of an explosive exchange that had even veteran talk show hosts left speechless. We're referring to the day that Arnold Schwarzenegger was actually asked to leave The View, following an explosive battle of words with Joy Behar that nobody saw coming. Now, this wasn't exactly a disagreement. This was an all-out, throw every dignity out the window verbal brawl that showed just how hot celebrity interviews can become when egos and politics clash. Before we get into the theatrics, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Have you ever witnessed an interview blow completely out of proportion like this? We'd love to know your thoughts. Let's go back to that morning at the View Studios. Everything was ordinary, relaxed even. Arnold Schwarzenegger got there early, looking every inch the movie star he is, in a sharp navy blue suit that appeared to have been tailored especially for him. He was there to plug his latest memoir. By all reports, it should have been an easy feel-good gig. A little nostalgia, some inspiration, some laughs. At the same time, in her dressing room, Joy Behar was laser beam intense. She was scanning through her prep notes, that telltale expression of resolve on her face. Fellow co-hosts who had worked with her for years could see she was preparing for something beyond idle chatter. Joy had long made a habit of berating Arnold's political history, and people familiar with the show knew that she had been fine-tuning her queries for weeks. When the cameras rolled, all seemed to be going well. Whoopi Goldberg greeted Arnold warmly with a smile, and the audience responded with a standing ovation. Arnold, flashing that familiar grin, waved to the audience and settled in at the table. And now for the part of the show where they actually talk. "Thank you, Whoopi. Always a pleasure," Reach replied, his recognizable Austrian accent adding a comfort to the room. Sonny Hostin was next to ask the first question. "So tell us about this new book. What inspired you to write another memoir?" Arnold leaned in, animated. "Well, Sonny," he said, "with all my bodybuilding, filmmaking, and political endeavors, I felt I had a few lessons in life to impart. Lessons of perseverance and living with purpose." Sarah Haynes nodded. "That's fascinating. What would you call your greatest challenge?" Arnold smiled and said, "You know, everyone always thought it was my accent or being an immigrant coming to America. But truly, my biggest challenge was myself, learning how to step out of my own way and trust the process." Through all of this entire introduction, Joy had been uncommonly silent. She smiled faintly, one that never reached her eyes, tapping idly at her notes with a pen. The other members of the panel sensed it, something was building, and then it did. As Whoopi asked Arnold what he viewed as his greatest achievement, Joy abruptly sat up straight, interrupting him with a voice that chilled the whole room. "Arnold," she snapped, "let's discuss your actual legacy. You departed California in worse condition than it was when you arrived. How do you respond to the fact that you wrote a book about success while your political record, to put it bluntly, was a failure?" The instant those words exited Joy Behar's lips, the whole studio came to a standstill. The audience, the other co-hosts, even the production staff, breathed collectively. You could have heard a pin drop. Arnold's ubiquitous smile wavered, just barely, but he remained composed, at least for the moment. "Joy," he declared firmly, "I suggest you double-check those facts. California was confronting some of the most difficult economic times in its history when I was governor." But Joy was not backing down. She riffled through her pile of papers with the air of a lawyer making her argument in court. "Oh, I've got the facts, Arnold," she said, narrowing her eyes. "California unemployment went from 7.4% when you came in to 12.5% when you exited. These aren't opinions, these are hard figures." Arnold's face grew taut. You could see him gritting his teeth. "You're taking those numbers out of context entirely," he said. "We were in the middle of a global economic meltdown. What you're not saying is that we overhauled California's broken workers' comp system and paved the way for environmental gains." "Environmental protection?" Joy fired back, her voice surging with incredulity. This from the guy who owned a fleet of Hummers and lived in a house that had a carbon footprint larger than most towns? Isn't that just a teensy bit hypocritical? At this point, the other co-hosts were fidgeting in their seats, attempting to come up with a way to diffuse the situation. But Joy was on a roll, and Arnold's legendary patience was showing signs of fracturing. His Austrian accent became thicker, a sign that longtime viewers knew meant trouble. "You know what, Joy?" he told her, his voice firm-edged with a harder edge. "It sounds like you're more interested in making drama than having an actual conversation." He waved his hand toward his book. "I've come here to discuss the lessons I've learned, persevering through failure, remaining focused, taking something from nothing. You want to make this a political ambush?" Joy's eyes widened in indignation. She was just getting warmed up. "What I don't get," she said, crowding in, "is how someone can spectacularly fail at their career and yet have the temerity to write a book telling other people how to succeed. That's like taking marriage tips from someone who's been divorced 3 times. And there it was, the line that entered into intimate grounds. Arnold's private life had been pulled through the tabloids more than he could count. For a moment, the mood grew heavy. The air in the studio seemed charged. Arnold's expression clouded. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and firm, with a growl underneath. "I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's just trying to make a name for themselves by tearing someone else down." He hesitated. "You want to criticize my policies? Go ahead. Criticize the work I did? Fair game. But when you bring my family into play, when you attack my private life, that's where I draw the line." Joy leaned back, that same sly smirk on her face, as though she just knocked out a punch. "I am not belittling your family, Arnold," Joy snapped. "I am simply saying if you couldn't get your own house in line, perhaps you're not the most qualified to be doling out life lessons. It's accountability." The tension in the room was heavy now. The studio audience remained still. Everyone could sense something extremely unusual and extremely honest was unfolding live on television. Arnold slowly rose from his chair. At 6'2", his presence was commanding, and his expression had turned from calm to stern. "You know what your problem is, Joy?" he said, voice tight. "You've spent so much time behind that desk tossing out cheap shots that you've forgotten what it's like to be in the arena. It's easy to throw the stones when you've never had to make the hard calls yourself." But Joy was not fazed. "Oh, don't deliver me the man in the arena lecture," she snorted. "You were a celebrity who strutted into politics on name recognition and vague promises. You expected it to be like memorizing lines from a script." Arnold leaned forward a bit, his voice rising for the first time during the interview. "At least I attempted to do something with my life. I didn't spend my whole career offering snide comments from a comfortable chair while actual people risked actual danger attempting to make a difference." That struck a chord. Joy's cheeks turned red. "What is your legacy, Arnold?" she asked. "Another motivational meme, a political flop?" "My legacy is being a truth teller like me, someone who gets to power through buying their way in and then heroics when it all falls apart. At least I've been truthful about what I do." Arnold gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Honest? You're calling that an honest discussion? Ambush interviewing a guest with personal shots isn't reporting, Joy. That's tabloid melodrama masquerading as daytime programming." Joy responded quickly. "Don't you try to school me in the practice of journalism, you muscle-bound also-ran. I've been posing tough questions since before you even knew the meaning of the word teleprompter. If you can't take being questioned, perhaps you shouldn't be." "Has been?" he echoed, his tone low and accusing. "Listen, Joy, I've done more in my worst year than a lot of people do in a lifetime. I've started companies. I've motivated millions. I've held public office. Flawlessly, perhaps not, but I showed up and got the job done. What have you built, by the way, aside from condescending monologues?" Joy rose now, standing before him, though she remained physically shorter than him. "You want to know what I've constructed?" she snapped. "I've constructed a career on bringing people like you to task. I cut through the PR, through the puff stories, and expose the public to what's actually happening. Behind all the muscles and that Hollywood smile, you're just another politician who promised too much and delivered too little." Arnold's fists balled at his sides, his stance firmed. For one charged second, it seemed as though things might escalate from hot to ugly. The security personnel at the studio suddenly leaned forward in their seats. obviously preparing for the very real possibility that this shouting match might escalate into a physical altercation. The air was that thick. Arnold, standing upright, glared at Joy straight in the eye. His tone fell into a quiet, almost frigid range. "Know what, Joy? I think we're finished here," he stated. "I came onto this program to have a considered, civilized discussion about my book. Instead, I entered into an ambush by somebody more interested in creating heat rather than a genuine conversation." But Joy was not about to let him leave without the last word. "Now you're the victim," she said in a mocking voice. Poor Arnold. Can't take some tough questions, so he stands up and exits. "Is that how you dealt with criticism when you were governor?" Arnold stood there, slowly turning back to her, his eyes narrowing into a look that could slice glass. "I've never run away from anything in my life, Joy," he said firmly. "But I've also learned not to waste time arguing with people who care more about scoring points than solving real problems." Joy fired back with lightning speed, voice biting and acerbic. "And you failed utterly at accomplishing anything. At least I excel at what I am. You weren't even successful at being a politician in California, a state where actors nearly get elected automatically." She leaned in closer, her voice heavy with conclusion. "Face facts, Arnold. You're a failed governor, desperate to rewrite your history." And that was it. Arnold's voice dropped to a low, intense whisper, calm, but carrying the weight of every word. "You know, Joy," he said, "I've dealt with bullies before, but I've never seen someone so bitter, so angry, that they can't hold a simple, respectful conversation with a guest on their own show. That's not strength, it's weakness." Joy's face turned pale, then red with fury. She clenched her teeth and spoke through them. "Get out," she spat. "Get out of my studio immediately. I don't have to sit here and listen to some has-been action hero lecture me about doing my job. Security, take Mr. Schwarzenegger out of here." And in an instant, the entire studio erupted in chaos. The other co-hosts were scrambling, some shouting over each other, some trying to calm things down. The audience let out audible gasps. No one knew what to say. Amid the noise, Arnold adjusted his tie and turned to leave. That familiar Hollywood smile appeared. But this time it held no warmth, no charm, just finality. "Don't worry, Joy," he said. "I wouldn't stay where I'm not welcome." He stopped at the edge of the stage, glanced back one more time and said, "But before I'm off, let me leave you with this thought. You can question my record. You can question my motives," Arnold stated, his voice firm and with a conviction. "But at the end of the day, I'll go home knowing I did everything I could to make a difference. And you'll go home knowing you spent your day attempting to tear another person down." With that, Arnold started to walk off the set. And then, something strange happened. The studio audience, who had been sitting in a stunned silence through the entire exchange, suddenly erupted into applause, and not the usual polite daytime TV clapping. This was real, loud, heartfelt applause that filled the studio with energy. Several people in the front row even stood up, clearly showing their support for Arnold and their disapproval of how Joy had handled the conversation. Joy's face reddened to crimson. She could see that the audience did not favor her, and it hurt. "Sit down," she irately told the crowd. "This is not about taking sides. This is about being accountable." But Arnold halted where he was. The unexpected display of support by the audience made him more resolute. Slowly, he turned and faced Joy again, his demeanor still but assured. "You know what, Joy?" he said. "I think I'm going to stay a little longer. These folks came here to see a show, and judging by the reaction, they're getting one." Whoopi Goldberg jumped in, clearly trying to bring things back to a civil tone. "Arnold, Joy, maybe let's all take a deep breath and get back to talking about the book." Arnold nodded respectfully toward Whoopi, but didn't back down. "Thank you for that, Whoopi," he replied. "However, I believe Joy and I have some business to attend to. She appears to be a lot on her mind, and I believe that this crowd needs to hear both points of view." Joy was clearly exasperated now. Her bid to usher Arnold away had evidently failed, and in front of a studio audience at that. "Fine," she growled between her teeth. "If you wish to remain here and continue embarrassing yourself, by all means do so. But don't anticipate my starting to go easy on you because you're having a tantrum." Arnold chuckled softly and settled himself quietly back into his chair. A tantrum, he asked, with an eyebrow raised. Delight, I'm likely the most composed individual in this whole studio today. You're the one who screamed for security and attempted to get me off the set. If anyone's having a tantrum here, I think we both know who that is. His remark was so dead on, even Sarah Haynes couldn't help but grin. She didn't look down quickly enough, and Joy saw the look and gave her one of those glances that could slice steel. Attempting to change the subject and possibly regain power, Joy leaned in. Now let's discuss your film career, she said, apparently seeking new ammunition. You earned millions playing action heroes who resolved all difficulties through violence. And now you expect people to take you seriously, as a writer and as a politician. Don't you think there's a disconnect? Arnold leaned back in his chair, completely at ease now, a half-smile hovering on his mouth. Joy, he said, I think you're blurring fantasy and reality. Those were films, Joy, entertainment, Arnold replied, his voice steady but strong. But if you really want to discuss those characters, let's see what they represented. They represented never giving up, doing what is right, standing up for what is right, and fighting for the innocent. Really, those aren't terrible things to live by, don't you think? Joy rolled her eyes. They were all about shooting first and then asking questions, she snapped back. They didn't fix problems. They just blew things up. That's not leadership, Arnold. That's mindless action. Arnold grinned and the audience laughed along with him. You know what, Joy? I think you've seen too many of my films, he said with a chuckle, reclining somewhat. Most of my heroes were really attempting to save the world, not destroy it. The Terminator saved Sarah Connor. Conan battled against evil kings. In Predator, Dutch gave his life to protect his men. These weren't bad guys, they were heroes. Joy didn't smile. Heroes? She said bluntly. They were comic book characters with big guns. And that made you qualified to govern the world's fifth largest economy? Don't you hear how silly that sounds? Arnold's smile wavered as his voice became more somber. What's absurd to me, he stated, is someone building a career off judging other people, particularly when they've never constructed anything themselves. You want to discuss qualifications? Okay, what qualified you to sit at this table and judge all those people who come walking through here? He leaned forward slightly, his voice tart but not unkind. Did you attend journalism school? Ever manage a campaign? Build a business from the ground up? The question plainly hit a note. Joy sat back up in her chair, her face growing defensive. I don't need to seek office to know when someone's failing in their job, she bristled. And I don't need to own a business to recognize a bad choice when she sees one. That's what critics do. We hold people accountable. Arnold nodded but didn't recede. Sure, accountability is valuable, he said, but there's a difference between actual, considered criticism and tearing people up to get a few headlines. A good critic doesn't complain. They provide ideas. They seek out ways to make things better. He fixed her with a stare. And up to this point today, all I've heard from you is negativity, jabs at me personally. So let me get this straight. Joy, where are your solutions? What do you think we should do differently? Joy was flustered now, the words spilling out more rapidly. My role isn't to fix problems. My role is to call out when others aren't fixing them, to ask the tough questions no one else will. Arnold shook his head, slightly raising his voice so it would carry above the growing noise of chatter surrounding them. But you're not asking tough questions, Joy. You're making accusations and praying something sticks. A tough question would be, why did you make this policy decision? What were the outcomes? Would you do it again? What you're doing, that's not journalism. It's assassination by character. At this point, the tension was palpable once more. The other host looked visibly uncomfortable, staring between the two of them, clearly desperate to see a way in. Sunny Hostin finally intervened, her voice rising slightly above the bedlam. Arnold, she said firmly but kindly, let's change the subject. Tell us more about your book. What's the primary message you hope readers will absorb from it? But Joy wasn't finished, not by a long way. Oh, I'll tell you what the true message of this book is, she declared, voice rising once more. It's that if you're famous and wealthy enough, you can fail upwards and still make everyone believe that you're a success. Arnold's patience was manifestly thinning now. He leaned forward, calm but cutting. "You know what, Joy?" he said. "I believe you're projecting. This is sounding very much like your life rather than mine. Because the fact is, I worked for every ounce of my success. Nobody gave it to me. I didn't inherit money. I didn't marry into connections. And I didn't ride on anybody's coattails. I earned it." Joy laughed, her tone becoming shrill. "Worked for it? Please. You were a bodybuilder who hit it big, became a movie star, and leveraged that celebrity to waltz into politics. That's not effort. That's timing." Arnold rose once more, but his action was now deliberate, slow, steady. "Lucky?" he asked, staring into her eyes. "Do you know how many people have become Mr. Olympia once? 7. Do you know how many people have come to this country knowing no English, learned the language, and become a box office suave sensation? Do you have any idea how many people have won a statewide election in California, let alone twice? That ain't luck. That takes decades of concentration, discipline, and hard work." Joy sat up too, not to be outdone. "And what did you do with all that success?" she asked, voice shaking with rage. "You left California worse off than you took it. You made promises you couldn't keep. You demonstrated that being famous does not qualify you to lead." Arnold didn't bat an eyelash. "At least I tried, Joy. I took the initiative. I ran for office. I accepted the challenge. You just sit in this chair day after day and shoot down the people who actually get out there and get the job done. It's easy to shoot down from the sidelines. It's a whole lot easier than actually being in the game." The tension in the studio had come to a head. The crowd was totally entranced, some yelling words of support to Arnold, some urging Joy to cool down. The atmosphere was charged. Everybody knew they were seeing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years. Joy, shaking now, said her next words as a knife. "You're right, Arnold. I do sit here and criticize. And you know why? Because people like you need to be called out. You coast on your fame, your charm, and that movie star smile like it's enough. But it's not. You failed, and I'm here to make sure someone says it out loud." Arnold's reply came fast, and it was the most cutting yet. "And I'm holding you accountable too, Joy," he told her, his tone strict and unyielding. "You are bitter, you're angry, and rather than using your platform to inspire or to uplift, you tear others down. You don't build anything. You don't create solutions. And the worst part is, you actually seem to relish it." Everyone in the studio appeared to catch its collective breath then. Joy was red-faced with rage, and Arnold was standing steadily, all action hero he'd ever been on film, but this time unplanned. The other hosts had given up on mediators long ago. They sat in silence, observing this war of titans. Two powerful personalities meeting in conflict of ideals, egos, and built-up frustration. "Enjoying things you want to discuss," Joy retorted, with a fiery tone. "You enjoyed being governor long enough to run back on Hollywood. You loved the light, you loved the power, but the work of governing? When that was over, you couldn't wait to finish it. That's why you failed," Joy replied, her words lancing through the tension like a blade. Arnold let out a laugh, but it wasn't the charming kind his fans were used to. It was cold, empty, almost painful. "Failed?" He spoke the words slowly. "Joy, I balanced a $40 billion budget deficit. I fixed a broken workers' comp system that was exporting jobs out of California. I invested in infrastructure and made California a leader in renewable energy. If that's failure, I'd hate to see what you have in mind for success." Joy fired back, her voice cracking very slightly under the pressure of the argument. "Success," she added, "is not taking office in your state with more unemployment than you found when you began. Success is not being able to borrow money simply to pay the electric bill. Success is not concluding your term so unpopular that your own party wouldn't even claim you." Those bitter, personal words appeared to turn a switch on Arnold. His voice fell once more to that low, raspy tone that meant more than a bellow. "You know what, Joy?" he said. "I believe we've just discovered the real problem here. You're not upset about my gubernatorial record. You're angry that you're irrelevant. While I was out there attempting to get things done, you've sat behind this desk and insulted people who actually do something." Joy's eyes grew wide, her face one of sheer rage. "Relevant?" she exclaimed, her voice growing loud. "I've been on the air longer than you've been in office. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel laureates, world leaders. Don't even think about lecturing me about relevance." Arnold didn't give an inch. "All right, Ria," he said, "but what have you done with all that access? What have you altered? What issues have you solved? You've sat across from some of the most influential people in the world. So what do you have to point to? A reputation for being difficult and a career founded on picking fights." That last shot landed hard. Joy reeled, if only metaphorically. "How dare you," she flashed. "How dare you question my career? I've informed the public. I've held people in power accountable. I've given a voice to those who didn't have one. That's more than you ever did as governor." Arnold gazed at her, nearly with sorrow in his eyes, and shook his head slowly. "Inform the public?" he asked quietly. "No, Joy, you don't inform, you inflame. You don't hold people accountable, you attack them. And as for giving others a voice, you only ever seem interested in amplifying your own." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "There's a big difference between journalism and what you do." Joy was nearly shouting now, her voice full of fire. "What I do," she growled, "is ask the questions nobody else will ask. What I do is keep people like you from bull-munching your way out of accountability. What I do is honest journalism, not the puff pieces everybody else takes potshots at you when you sit on these programs." Arnold remained motionless, his reply gentle but biting. "No, Joy," he replied. "What you do is bully individuals. You puff yourself up by putting others down. You cause controversy where there need not be any, solely to make yourself self-important. And what you do," Arnold went on calmly, "is blacken the reputation of journalism." The studio was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the other hosts, typically quick to diffuse the situation and steer it back to safety, sat paralyzed, their eyes wide with shock, trapped in the power of the moment. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Joy's hands were shaking, her face red with anger. Arnold, on the other hand, was impossibly composed. That studied calmness only served to make his words land like a blow. "No what?" Joy broke in at last, her voice tense and shaking. "I don't have to sit here listening to this. I don't need a lecture from a man who believes that appearing in a few hit films qualifies him to administer a state government. Security! I want him removed from here. Now." But Arnold wasn't about to leave yet. "That's it," he said, his tone still controlled. "That's your favorite trick, isn't it, Joy? To walk away from the conversation when you get uncomfortable. Call security when you can't have your say. Is that how you fix all of your issues? By silencing those who don't agree with you?" The security officer stepped forward, noticing the gravity of the request. Joy stepped around and then repeated with a sharp tone, "I said, get him out. This interview is over." Arnold looked at them and then at Joy. "I'll go away," he said quietly, "but not because you are expelling me. I will go away because I have come here to tell my story, and I believe that the audience has finally heard the complete picture, the two sides, and I believe they have an idea of what type of person you actually are." He took a step away, then casting one final look back over his shoulder, he landed the final blow. "Know what the true tragedy is, Joy? You had the potential to be great. You're intelligent. You have a voice that people listen to. You carry real power. But rather than using those talents to bring people together or cast light where it's necessary, you divided. You opted for bitterness. You opted for drama rather than purpose. And that's something you'll have to live with." Joy bristled, venom in her voice. "Don't you dare feel sorry for me, Arnold. Don't stand there pretending to be some moral arbiter. You're a failed politician on book tour, attempting to rehabilitate your reputation. I'm a respected broadcaster who sat in this seat for decades. We are not the same." Arnold gave her one final glance in that infamous half-smile. "You're right, Joy," he said quietly. "We're not the same, and thank God for that." With that, Arnold turned and walked off the set. The studio was in chaos. Joy sat stiffly in her chair, stunned and speechless, while the audience buzzed around her. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of what was arguably the most explosive moment in daytime television history. The other hosts struggled to maintain composure. Longtime anchor Whoopi Goldberg attempted to break to commercials, but her voice trembled. Joy still glared at the desk in front of her, her face flushed with rage and humiliation. The hush of the crowd spoke volumes. Some sat open-mouthed in shock. Others craned forward to whisper to one another, their heads shaking. Many openly identified with Arnold and were starting to wonder if Joy had overstepped herself. As the screen at last went dark, the tension remained. Nothing, not the show, not Joy's reputation, and not Arnold's image, would ever quite be the same now. Joy had gotten the fight she'd been leading up to for weeks, but she hadn't predicted the result. She'd initiated the fight, but she hadn't emerged victorious. The blaze of hot words between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Joy Behar had finally burned out, but its effect was just starting. What happened that day was not merely a heated exchange. It was a moment that would resonate in the annals of TV history, replayed and debated for years to come. Yes, Arnold was told to exit the view, but in storming off that stage, he might have said more about his host than she ever meant to say. A lot of viewers cut through the chatter and saw something beneath. Arnold holding firm, and a host whose ire maybe finally went too far. It wasn't just an argument, it was a reckoning, and it just might wind up being one of the most unforgettable layings down the law in daytime TV history. But what do you think? Have you ever seen a celebrity interview go off the rails like that? Was Arnold defending himself, or was Joy simply doing her job? Let me know your opinion in comments below. And if you like this analysis, don't miss out on liking, sharing, and subscribing to more dramatic moments, unforgettable interviews, and honest talk. Here. Thanks for watching.